The holy planet Purgatory. After several Dionosks, the cosmic ship Karnak left the holy planet and again began to fall further in the direction of the place of its final destination, and namely, in the direction of that planet on which Beelzebub had had the place of his arising, and whither he was returning to finish that long existence of his, which on account of certain definite circumstances he had to fulfill on various cosmic concentrations of our great universe, and always under conditions very unfavourable for him personally, yet which he nevertheless objectively fulfilled quite meritoriously. And so, when the usual tempo of the falling of the ship Karnak had been re-established, Hussein, the grandson of Beelzebub, again sat down at his feet and turning to him said, "Grandfather, oh dear grandfather, explain to me, please, why, as my uncle Tualan told me, does our common, all-embracing, uni-being, autocrat endlessness appear so often on this holy planet on which we have just been?" At this question of his grandson, Beelzebub this time became thoughtful a little longer than usual, and then, also with greater concentration than was usual for him, slowly said, "Yes, I do not know, my dear boy, with what to begin this time, in order to answer this question of yours in such a form as would satisfy me also, since among many other tasks I have set myself in respect of you, as regards your Osciano, there is also this, that you, at your age, should have an exhaustive knowledge and understanding about this holy planet. In any case, you must first of all be told that this same holy planet, which is called Purgatory, is for the whole of our great universe, as it were, the heart and place of concentration of all the completing results of the pulsation of everything that functions and exists in the universe. Our common Father Creator Endlessness appears there so often only because this holy planet is the place of the existence of the, in the highest degree, unfortunate high being bodies who obtain their coating on various planets of the whole of our great universe. The higher being bodies who have already merited to dwell on this holy planet suffer maybe as much as anybody in the whole of our great universe. In view of this, our all-loving, endlessly merciful and absolutely just Creator Endlessness, having no other possibility of helping these unfortunate higher being bodies with anything, often appears there, so that by these appearances of his he may soothe them, if only a little, in their terrible inevitable state of inexpressible anguish. This planet began to actualize that aim for which it now exists, much later than that period of the flow of time when the completing process of the creation of the now existing world was finished. In the beginning, all these higher being bodies who at the present time have the place of their existence on this holy planet went direct on to our most holy Son Absolute. But later, when that all-universal calamity, which we call the Chute God Litanical period, occurred in our great universe, then after this terrifying common cosmic calamity, similar higher being bodies, who now dwell on this holy planet, ceased to have the possibility of blending directly with our most holy Son Absolute. Only after this Chute God Litanical period did the necessity appear for such a kind of general universal functioning which this holy planet Purgatory actualizes at the present time. It was just from this time that the whole surface of this holy planet was correspondingly organized and adapted in such a way that these higher being bodies might have the place of their already unavoidable existence on it. Having said this, Beelzebub became a little thoughtful, and with a slight smile continued to tell the following. This holy planet is not only the centre of the concentrations of the results of the functioning of all that exists, but it is also now the best, richest, and most beautiful of all the planets of our universe. When we were there, you probably noticed that we always saw and sensed that from there all the space of our great universe, or, as your favourites would say, all the skies reflected, as it were, the radiance which recalls the radiance of the famous and incomparable Almacornian turquoise. Its atmosphere is always pure, like the phenomenal sacraments crystal. Everywhere there, every individual with all his present senses, everything external, isco und nitien nernöli, or as your favourites would say, blissfully, delightfully. On that holy planet, as the informed say, of springs alone, both mineral and fresh, which for purity and naturalness are unequalled on any other planet of our universe, there are about 10,000. There, from the whole of our universe, are gathered the most beautiful and best songbirds, of which, as the informed also say, there are about 12,000 species. And as for the supplementary formations, such as flowers, fruits, berries, and all others of the same kind, words are inadequate. It can be said that there are collected and acclimatized there almost the whole flora, fauna, and foscalia from all the planets of our great universe. Everywhere on that holy planet, in corresponding gorges, are convenient caves of all kinds of interior form, made partly by nature herself and partly artificially, with striking views from their entrances, and in these caves there is everything that can be required for a blissful and tranquil existence, with the complete absence of any essence anxiety whatever in any part of the presence of any cosmic independent individual, such as higher being bodies can also become. It is just in these caves that those higher being bodies exist by their own choice, who, owing to their merits, come to this holy planet from the whole of our great universe for their further existence. Besides all I have mentioned, there are also there the very best, in regard to convenience as well as to speed, what are called ego-lion-optes, or as they are still sometimes called, omnipresent platforms. These ego-lion-optes freely move in all directions in the atmosphere of the holy planet at any desired speed, even at that speed in which the second-degree suns of our universe fall. The system of this kind of ego-lion-opte was, it seems, invented specially for this holy planet by the famous angel, now already archangel, Herkission. Having uttered these last words, Beelzebub suddenly became silent and again deeply thoughtful, and Hossein and Ahun looked at him with surprise and interrogation. After a fairly long time had passed, Beelzebub, shaking his head in a special manner, again turned to Hossein and said, "I am just now thinking that it would be very reasonable on my part, if to this question of yours, why our endlessness so often rejoices this holy planet with his appearance, I would answer in such a way, so that I could, apropos, explain to you also what I have already several times promised you to explain. That is to say, about the fundamental cosmic laws by which our present world is maintained, and on the basis of which it exists. And this, moreover, should be done because if both of those questions are taken together, only then will you have all-round material for a complete representation and exhaustive understanding about this holy planet Purgatory, and at the same time learn something more about the free-brain beings who have interested you and who arise on the planet Earth. I wish to give you also now as many clear and detailed explanations as possible concerning this holy planet, as sooner or later you will have to know about this, because every responsible free-brain being of our universe, irrespective of the nature of the causes and place of his arising, and also of the form of his exterior coating, will ultimately have to learn about everything concerning this holy planet. And he must know all this in order to strive to exist in that direction which corresponds just to the aim and sense of existence, which striving is the objective lot of every free-brain being, in whom, whatever the causes may be, the germ arises for the coating of a higher being body. And so, my boy, first of all I must once more and in greater detail repeat that our endlessness was forced to create the whole world which now exists at the present time. In the beginning, when nothing yet existed, and when the whole of our universe was empty endless space with the presence of only the prime source cosmic substance, Epherochrono, our present most great and most holy Sun Absolute, existed alone in all this empty space. And it was on this then sole cosmic concentration that our uni-being Creator, with his cherubim and seraphim, had the place of his most glorious being. It was just during this same period of the flow of time that there came to our Creator or Maintainer the forced need to create our present existing megalocosmos, i.e. our world. From the third most sacred canticle of our cherubim and seraphim, we were worthy of learning that our Creator Omnipotent once ascertained that this same Sun Absolute, on which he dwelt with his cherubim and seraphim, was, although almost imperceptibly yet nevertheless gradually diminishing in volume. As the fact ascertained by him appeared to him very serious, he then decided immediately to review all the laws which maintained the existence of that, then still sole, cosmic concentration. During this review, our omnipotent Creator, for the first time, made it clear that the cause of this gradual diminishing of the volume of the Sun Absolute was merely the hieropath, that is, the flow of time itself. Thereupon our endlessness became thoughtful, for in his divine deliberations he became clearly aware that if this hieropath should so continue to diminish the volume of the Sun Absolute, then sooner or later it would ultimately bring about the complete destruction of this sole place of his being. And so, my boy, in view of this, our endlessness was then just compelled to take certain corresponding measures, so that from this hieropath the destruction of our most holy Sun Absolute could not eventually occur. Further again, from the sacred canticle of our cherubim and seraphim, but this time the fifth sacred canticle, we were worthy of learning that after this divine ascertainment of his, our endlessness devoted himself entirely to finding a possibility of averting such an inevitable end, which had to occur according to the lawful commands of the merciless hieropath, and that after his long divine deliberations, he decided to create our present existing megalocosmos. In order that you may more clearly understand how our endlessness decided to attain immunity from the maleficent action of the merciless hieropath, and of course how he ultimately actualized it all, you must first of all know that before this, the most holy Sun Absolute was maintained and existed on the basis of the system called auto-egocrat, i.e., on that principle according to which the inner forces which maintain the existence of this cosmic concentration had an independent functioning, not depending on any forces proceeding from outside, and which were based also on those two fundamental cosmic sacred laws, by which at the present time also the whole of our present megalocosmos is maintained, and on the basis of which it exists, and namely on the basis of those two fundamental primordial sacred cosmic laws called the sacred Apparatus and the sacred Triomasi-Kamno. About both of these fundamental cosmic primordial sacred laws I have already once told you a little. Now, however, I shall try to explain to you about them in rather more detail. The first of these fundamental primordial cosmic sacred laws, namely the law of heptaparapashanok, present-day objective cosmic science, by the way, formulates in the following words: the line of the flow of forces constantly deflecting according to law and uniting again at its ends. This sacred primordial cosmic law has 7 deflections, or as it is still otherwise said, 7 centres of gravity. And the distance between each 2 of these deflections, or centres of gravity, is called a stopinder of the sacred heptaparapassionok. This law, passing through everything newly arising and everything existing, always makes its completing process with its 7 stop-inders. And in regard to the second primordial fundamental cosmic law, and namely the sacred triamazi kamno, common cosmic objective science also formulates with the words, a new arising from the previously arisen through the harnal miasnal, the process of which is actualized thus. The higher blends with the lower in order to actualize the middle, and thus becomes either higher for the preceding lower, or lower for the succeeding higher. And as I already told you, this sacred triamazi kamno consists of 3 independent forces, which are called the first, sup ophios, the second, sup skiros, the third, sup aphanotos, with 3 holy forces of the sacred triamazi kamno. The said science calls as follows. The first, the affirming force, or the pushing force, or simply the force plus. The second, the denying force, or the resisting force, or simply the force minus. And the third, the reconciling force, or the equilibrating force, or the neutralizing force. At this place of my explanations concerning chiefly the fundamental laws of world creation and world maintenance, it is interesting to notice, by the way, that the free-brain beings of this planet which has taken your fancy already began at this period, when the consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer were not yet crystallized in their common presences, to be aware of these 3 holy forces of the sacred triamazi kamno, and then named them: the first, God the Father; the second, God the Son; and the third, God the Holy Ghost, and in various cases expressed the hidden meaning of them, and also their longing to have a beneficent effect from them for their own individuality, by the following prayers: sources of divine rejoicings, revolts and sufferings, direct your actions upon us. Or, holy affirming, holy denying, holy reconciling, transubstantiating me for my being. Or, holy God, holy firm, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Now, my boy, listen further very attentively. And so, in the beginning, as I've already told you, our most holy Son Absolute was maintained by the help of these 2 primordial sacred laws. But then these primordial laws functioned independently, without the help of any forces whatsoever coming from outside, and this system was still called only the alter ego-crat. And so our all-maintaining endlessness decided to change the principle of the system of the functionings of both of these fundamental sacred laws, and, namely, he decided to make their independent functioning dependent on forces coming from outside. And so, in consequence of the fact that for this new system of functioning of the forces, which until then maintained the existence of the most holy Son Absolute, there are required outside of the Son Absolute corresponding sources in which such forces could arise, and from which they could flow into the presence of the most holy Son Absolute. Our almighty endlessness was just then compelled to create a now existing megalocosmos, with all the cosmoses of different scales and relatively independent cosmic formations present in it, and from then on the system which maintained the existence of the Son Absolute began to be called Trogo Auto Ego-Crat. Our common Father Omni-Being Endlessness having decided to change the principle of the maintenance of the existence of this then still unique cosmic concentration and sole place of his most glorious being, first of all altered the process itself of the functioning of these two primordial fundamental sacred laws, and he actualized the greater change in the law of the sacred heptaparapashinok. These changes in the function of the sacred heptaparapashinok consisted in this, that in three of its stoppinders he altered the what are called subjective actions, which had been until then in the stoppinders, in this respect, that in one he lengthened the law conformable successiveness, shortened it in another, and in a third disharmonized it, and namely, with the purpose of providing the requisite inherency for receiving for its functioning the automatic affluence of all forces which were near, he lengthened the stoppinder between its third and fourth deflections. This same stoppinder of the sacred heptaparapashinok is just that one which is still called the mechano-coinciding middle in, and the stoppinder which he shortened is between its last deflection and the beginning of a new cycle of its completing process. By this same shortening, for the purpose of facilitating the commencement of a new cycle of its completing process, he predetermined the functioning of the given stoppinder to be dependent only upon the affluence of forces obtained from outside through that stoppinder from the results of the action of that cosmic concentration itself, in which the completing process of this primordial fundamental sacred law flows. And this stoppinder of the sacred heptaparapashinok is just that one which is still called the intentionally actualized modality in. As regards the third stoppinder, then changed in its subjective action, and which is fifth in the general successiveness, and is called Hano-Eut, its disharmony flowed by itself from the change of the two aforementioned stoppinders. This disharmony, in its subjective functioning, flowing from its asymmetry, so to say, in relation to the whole entire completing process of the sacred heptaparapashinok, consists in the following. If the completing process of this sacred law flows in conditions where during its processes there are many extraneously caused vibrations, then all its functioning gives only external results. But if this same process proceeds in absolute quiet, without any external extraneously caused vibrations whatsoever, then all the results of the action of its functioning remain within that concentration in which it completes its process, and for the outside these results only become evident on direct and immediate contact with it. And if, however, during its functioning there are neither of these two sharply opposite conditions, then the results of the actions of its process usually divide themselves into the external and the internal. Thus, from that time, the process of actualization began to proceed in the greatest as well as in the smallest cosmic concentrations, with these stoppinders of this primordial sacred law of heptaparapashinok changed in this way in their subjective actions. I repeat, my boy, try very hard to understand everything that will relate to both these fundamental cosmic sacred laws, since knowledge of these sacred laws, particularly knowledge relating to the particularities of the sacred heptaparapashinok, will help you in the future to understand very easily and very well all the second grade and third grade laws of world creation and world existence. Likewise, an all-round awareness of everything concerning these sacred laws also conduces, in general, to this, that free-brained beings, irrespective of the form of their exterior coating, by becoming capable in the presence of all cosmic factors not depending on them and arising round about them, both the personally favourable as well as the unfavourable, of pondering on the sense of existence, acquire data for the elucidation and reconciliation in themselves of that, what is called individual collision, which often arises in general in free-brain beings from the contradiction between the concrete results flowing from the processes of all the cosmic laws and the results presupposed and even quite surely expected by their what is called sane logic, and thus correctly evaluating the essential significance of their own presence, they become capable of becoming aware of the genuine corresponding place for themselves in these common cosmic actualizations. In short, the transmutation in themselves of an all-round understanding of the function of both these fundamental sacred laws conduces to this, that in the common presences of free-brain beings, data are crystallized for engendering that divine property which it is indispensable for every normal free-brain being to have, and which exists under the name of Zemuniranos. Of this your favourites have also an approximate representation, and they call it impartiality. And so, my dear boy, our common Father Creator Almighty, having then in the beginning changed the functioning of both these primordial sacred laws, directed the action of their forces from within the most holy Son Absolute into the space of the universe, whereupon there was obtained the what is called emanation of the Son Absolute, and now called Theomertmelogos, or Word God. For the clarity of certain of my future explanations, it must here be remarked that in the process of the creation of the now existing world, the divine will-power of our endlessness participated only at the beginning. The subsequent creation went on automatically, of its own accord, entirely without the participation of his own divine will-power, thanks only to these two changed fundamental, primordial, cosmic laws. And the process itself of creation proceeded then in the following successiveness. Thanks to the new particularity of the fifth stopinder of the sacred Heptapara, these emanations issuing from the Son Absolute began to act at certain definite points of the space of the universe upon the prime source cosmic substance Epherochrono, from which, owing to the totality of the former and the new particularities of the sacred primordial laws, certain definite concentrations began to be concentrated. Further, thanks to these factors and also to their own laws of Heptapara and Triomazzi-Camno, which had already begun to arise in these definite concentrations with their action upon each other, everything which had to be gradually began to be crystallized in these concentrations, and as a result of all this, those large concentrations were obtained which exist also until now, and which we now call second-order suns. When these newly arisen suns had been completely actualized, and their own functionings of both the fundamental laws had been firmly established in them, then in them also, similarly to the most holy Son Absolute, their own results began to be transformed and to be radiated, which, together with the emanations issuing from the most holy Son Absolute into the space of the universe, became the factors for the actualization of the common cosmic fundamental process of the sacred law of Triomazzi-Camno, and that is to say, the most holy Theomertmelogos began to manifest itself in the quality of the third holy force of the sacred Triomazzi-Camno. The results of any one of the newly arisen second-order suns began to serve as the first holy force, and the results of all the other newly arisen second-order suns in relation to this mentioned one newly arisen sun as the second holy force of this sacred law. Thanks to the process of the common cosmic sacred Triomazzi-Camno, thus established in the space of the universe, crystallizations of different what is called density gradually began to be formed around each of the second-order suns out of that same prime source, Epherochrono, and grouping themselves around these newly arisen suns, new concentrations began to take form, as a result of which more new suns were obtained, but this time third-order suns. These third-order concentrations are just those cosmic concentrations which at the present time are called planets. At this very place in the process of the first outer cycle of the fundamental sacred heptaparapashinok, namely, after the formation of the third-order suns or planets just here, owing to the changed fifth deflection of the sacred heptaparapashinok, which, as I've already said, is now called Hanu Eut, the initially given momentum for the fundamental completing process, having lost half the force of its vivifyingness, began in its further functioning to have only half of the manifestation of its action outside itself, and the other half for itself, i.e., for its very own functioning, the consequences of which were that on these last big results, i.e., on these said third-order suns or planets, there began to arise what are called similarities to the already arisen. And as after this, surrounding conditions of actualizations were everywhere established corresponding to the manifestation of the second particularity of the fifth stopinder of the fundamental sacred heptaparapashinok, therefore from then on the actualization of the fundamental outer circle of the sacred heptaparapashinok ceased, and all the action of its functioning entered forever into the results already manifested by it, and in them there began to proceed its inherent permanent process of transformation called evolution and involution. And then, thanks this time to a second-grade cosmic law which is called Litzveritzi, or the aggregation of the homogeneous, there began to be grouped on the planets themselves from the mentioned relatively independent new formations named similarities to the already arisen, yet other also relatively independent formations. Thanks just to these processes of evolution and involution inherent in the sacred heptaparapashinok, there also began to be crystallized and decrystallized in the presences of all the greatest and smallest cosmic concentrations, all kinds of definite cosmic substances with their own inherent subjective properties, and which objective science calls active elements. And all the results of the evolution and involution of these active elements, actualizing the trogo-auto-egocratic principle of existence of everything existing in the universe by means of reciprocal feeding and maintaining each other's existence, produce the said common cosmic process, Iran Oran Umanje, or as I've already said, what objective science calls common cosmic exchange of substances. And so, my boy, thanks to this new system of the reciprocal feeding of everything existing in the universe, in which our most holy Son Absolute itself participated, there was established in it that equilibrium which at the present time no longer gives the merciless hieropath any possibility of bringing about anything unforeseen whatsoever to our most great and most holy Son Absolute, and thus the motive for the divine anxiety of our almighty uni-being endingness concerning the wholeness of his eternal place of dwelling disappeared forever. Here it is necessary to tell you that when this most wide divine actualization was finished, our triumphant cherubim and seraphim then gave, for the first time, to all the newly arisen actualizations those names which exist even until today. Every relatively independent concentration in general they then defined by the word cosmos, and to distinguish the different orders of arising of these cosmoses, they added to this definition cosmos a separate corresponding name, and namely they named the most holy prime source sun absolute itself, protocosmos. Each newly arisen second-order sun, with all its consequent definite results, they called deuterocosmos. Third-order suns, i.e. those we now call planets, they called tritocosmos. The smallest relatively independent formation on the planets, which arose thanks to the new inherency of the fifth stopinder of the sacred heptaparapashinok, and which is the very smallest similarity to the whole, was called microcosmos. And finally, those formations of the microcosmos, and which also became concentrated on the planets, this time thanks to the second-order cosmic law called mutual attraction of the similar, were named tetrarchocosmoses. And all these cosmoses, which together compose our present world, began to be called the megalocosmos. And then also our cherubim gave names, also existing until now, to the emanations and radiations issuing from all these cosmoses of different scales, by means of which the process of the most great cosmic trogo-auto-egocrat proceeds. 1. The emanation of the most holy sun absolute itself they called, as I've already told you, Theomertmelogos, or Word God. 2. The radiation of each separate second-order sun, Mentikifzion. 3. The radiation of each planet separately they called Dynamo-Mumzion. 4. That given off from the microcosmoses they called Photoinzion. 5. The radiations issuing from the tetrarchocosmoses they called Hambledosium. 6. The radiations of all the planets together of any solar system they called Astro-Luo-Lucizion. 7. The common radiations of all the newly arisen second-order suns taken together they called Polio-Rophiopal. And all the results issuing from all the cosmic sources, great and small, taken together, were also then named by them the common cosmic Asian Bal-Uazia. It is interesting to remark that concerning this common cosmic Ancien Bal-Uazia, present-day objective science has also the formula, everything issuing from everything and again entering into everything. Independent names were then given also to all the, as they are called, temporally independent crystallizations arising in each of the innumerable cosmoses by the involutionary and involutionary processes of these fundamental sacred laws. I shall not enumerate the names of the large number of these independent centres of gravity, which become crystallized in all separate cosmoses, but shall indicate only the names of those definite centre of gravity active elements, which become crystallized in each separate cosmos, and which have a direct relation with my following elucidations, and, namely, those which are crystallized in the presences of tetrarchocosmoses and have such a temporally independent centre of gravity. In tetrarchocosmoses, the following names were given to these independent arisings. 1. Proto-Ahari. 2. Defta-Ahari. 3. Trioto-Ahari. 4. Tet-Artahari. 5. Piando-Johari. 6. Exiohari. 7. Resolzarion. And now, my boy, after everything that I've elucidated to you, we can return to the question why and how higher being bodies, or as your favourites name them, souls, began to arise in our universe, and why our uni-being common Father turned his divine attention particularly to just these cosmic arisings. The point is that when the common cosmic harmonious equilibrium had become regularized and established in all those cosmoses of different scales, then in each of these tetatocosmoses, i.e., in each separate relatively independent formation of the aggregation of microcosmoses, which had its arising on the surface of the planets, the surrounding conditions on the surface of which accidentally began to correspond to certain data present in these cosmoses, owing to which they could exist for a certain period of time without what is called secruano, i.e., without constant individual tension, the possibility appeared of independent automatic moving from one place to another on the surface of the given planets. And thereupon, when our common Father Endlessness ascertained this automatic moving of theirs, there then arose for the first time in him the divine idea of making use of it as a help for himself in the administration of the enlarging world. From that time on, he began to actualize everything further for these cosmoses in such a direction that the inevitable what is called okruonu, i.e., the periodic repetition in them of the completing process of the sacred heptaparapashinok, might be accomplished in such a way that, under conditions of a certain kind of change in the functioning of the common presences of some of these tetatocosmoses, they might be transformed and crystallized, besides the crystallizations which had to be transformed for the purpose of the new common cosmic exchange of substances, also those active elements from which new independent formations might be coated in them themselves with the inherent possibility of acquiring individual reason. That this idea first arose just then in our endlessness, we can also see from the words of that sacred canticle with which at the present time, at all divine solemnities, our cherubim and cherubim extol the marvellous works of our Creator. Before continuing to relate further how this was actualized, it is necessary to tell you that the functioning of the mentioned common cosmic Iranumanj is harmonized in such a way that all the results obtained from transformations in different cosmoses localize themselves together according to what is called qualitativeness of vibrations. And these localizations penetrate everywhere throughout the universe and take a corresponding part in planetary as well as in surplanetary formations, and generally have as the temporary place of their free concentration the what are called atmospheres, with which all the planets of our megalocosmos are surrounded, and through which connection is established for the common cosmic Iranumanj. And so, the further results of this divine attention in respect of the mentioned tetatocosmoses consisted in this, that during their serving as apparatuses for the most great cosmic trogo-auto-egocrat, the possibility was obtained in them that from among the cosmic substances transformed through them, both for the needs of the most great common cosmic sacred trogo-auto-egocrat, as well as for the supply of substances expended by them for the process of their own existence, and composed exclusively of cosmic crystallizations, which are derived from the transformation of that planet itself from which the given tetatocosmoses arose. Such results began to be obtained in their common presences under the mentioned conditions as proceed from common forces of a higher order, and consequently composed of what are called vibrations of greater vivifyingness. Now, from such cosmic results, exactly similar forms began to be coated in their common presences, at first from the cosmic substances metokyphosion, i.e. from the substances transformed by the Sun and by other planets of that solar system within the limits of which the given tetatocosmoses had the place of their arising, and which cosmic substances reach every planet through the radiations of the said cosmic concentrations. In this way, the common presences of certain teratocosmoses began beforehand to be composed of two different independent formations arisen from two entirely different cosmic sources, and these began to have a joint existence, as if one were placed within the other. And so, my boy, when similar coatings of previously coated teratocosmoses were completed and began to function correspondingly, then from that time on they ceased calling them teratocosmoses and began to call them beings, which then meant two-natured. And these same second coatings alone began to be called bodies Gurdjieff. Now when in this new part of these two-natured formations everything corresponding was acquired, and when all that functioning which it is proper to such cosmic arisings to have was finally established, then these same new formations in their turn, on exactly the same basis as in the first case, and also under the conditions of a certain kind of change of functioning, began to absorb and assimilate into themselves such cosmic substances as had their arising immediately from the most holy Theomert Malogos, and similarities of a third kind began to be coated in them, which are the higher sacred parts of beings, and which we now call higher being bodies. Further, when their higher being bodies were finally coated and all the corresponding functions had been acquired in them, and chiefly when it became possible for the data for engendering the sacred function, named objective reason, to become crystallized in them, which data can become crystallized exclusively only in the presences of those cosmic arisings, and then what is called Rusku Anu occurred to these teratocosmoses, or beings, i.e. the separation of these diverse-natured, three-in-one formations from each other. Only then did this higher being part receive the possibility of uniting itself with the cause of causes of everything now existing, i.e. with our most Holy Son Absolute, and began to fulfill the purpose on which our all-embracing endlessness had placed his hope. Now it is necessary to explain to you in more detail in what successiveness this first sacred Rusku Anu then occurred to these first teratocosmoses, and how it occurs also now to the, as they are called, free-brain beings. At first, on the planet itself, the second being body, i.e. the body Gurdjieff, together with the third being body, separate themselves from the fundamental planetary body, and leaving this planetary body on the planet, rise both together to that sphere where those cosmic substances, from the localizations of which the body Gurdjieff of a being arises, have their place of concentration. And only there, at the end of a certain time, does the principal and final sacred Rusku Anu occur to this two-natured arising, after which such a higher being part indeed becomes an independent individual with its own individual reason. Previously, i.e. before the Chute God litanical period, this sacred cosmic actualization was only after this second process of the sacred Rusku Anu, either thought worthy of uniting with the presence of our most holy Son Absolute, or went into other cosmic concentrations which such independent holy individuals were needed. And if at the moment of the approach of the final process of the sacred Rusku Anu, these cosmic arisings had not yet attained to the required gradation of reason of the sacred scale of reason, then this higher being part had to exist in the said sphere until it had perfected its reason to the required degree. It is impossible not to take notice here of that objective terror which occurs to the already risen higher being parts who, owing to all results in new cosmic processes unforeseen from above, have not yet perfected themselves up to the necessary gradations of reason. The point is that according to various second-grade cosmic laws, the being-body Kejjan cannot exist long in this sphere, and at the end of a certain time this second being part must decompose, irrespective of whether the higher being part existing within it had by that time attained the requisite degree of reason, and in view of the fact that as long as this higher being part does not perfect its reason to the requisite degree, it must always be dependent upon some Kejjanian arising or other. Therefore, immediately after the second sacred Raskuanu, every such still unperfected higher being body gets into a state called Tek Gek Denel, or searching for some other similar two-natured arising corresponding to itself. So that when the higher part of this other two-natured arising perfects itself to the required degree of reason, and the final process of the sacred Raskuana occurs to it, and the speedy disintegration of its Kejjan body is not yet clearly sensed, this higher being body might instantly enter this other body Kejjan and continue to exist in it for its further perfection, which perfection must sooner or later be inevitably accomplished by every arisen higher being body. And that is why, in that sphere to where the higher being part goes after the first sacred Raskuanu, that process proceeds called Okip Calvinian exchange of the external part of the soul, or exchange of the former being body Kejjan. Here you might as well be told that your favourites also have, as it were, a similar representative about the Opicavalian exchange, and they have even invented a very clever name for it, namely metempsychosis, or reincarnation, and that branch of their famous science which in recent centuries has been created around this question also gradually became, and at the present already is, one of those minor maleficent factors, the totality of which is gradually making their reason, already strange enough without this, always more and more, as our dear Mullah Nasir ad-Din would say, show rum mu rum minion. According to the fantastic branch of this theory of their science, now called spiritualism, they suppose, among other things, that each of them already has a higher being part, or, as they call it, a soul, and that a transmigration must be occurring the whole time to this soul, i.e. something of the kind of this same Okipagnivian exchange of which I have just spoken. Of course, if these unfortunates would only take into consideration that according to the second-grade cosmic law called Teni Kadoa, or law of gravity, this same being part, if in rare cases it does happen that it arises in them, instantly rises after the first Raskuano of the being, or as they express it, after the death of the being, from the surface of their planet, and if they understood that the explanations and proofs given by this branch of their science, of all sorts of phenomena which proceed as it were among them there, thanks to those fantastic souls of theirs, were only the fruits of their idle fancy, then they would also realize that everything else proved by this science of theirs is also nothing else but Mullah Nasir ad-Din's twaddle. Now, as regards the first two lower being bodies, namely the planetary body and the body Kejjan, then after the first sacred Raskuano of a being, his planetary body, being formed of microcosmoses, or of crystallizations transformed on that planet itself, gradually decomposes and disintegrates there on that same planet, according to a certain second-grade cosmic law called, again, Tano Tu Tor, into its own primordial substances from which it obtained its arising. As regards the second being body, namely the body Kejjan, this body being formed of radiations of other concentrations of tritocosmoses and of the sun itself of the given solar system, and having entered after the second process of the sacred Raskuano into the sphere just mentioned, also begins gradually to decompose, and the crystallizations of which it is composed go in various ways into the sphere of its own primordial arisings. But the higher being body itself, being formed of crystallizations received directly from the sacred Theomert Logos into the solar system within the limits of which the being arises, and where his existence proceeds, can never decompose, and this higher part must exist in the given solar system as long as it does not perfect itself to the required reason, to just that reason which makes similar cosmic formations, what are called Iran Kapak, i.e. such formations of the mentioned most sacred substances as can exist and be independent of Keshjanian arisings, and at the same time not be subject to what are called painful influences from any external cosmic factors whatsoever. And so, my boy, as I've already told you, after these cosmic arisings had perfected their reason to the necessary gradation of the sacred rule of reason, they were in the beginning taken on to the Son Absolute for the fulfillment of roles predestined for them by our Creator Endlessness. It is necessary to tell you that concerning the determination of the degrees of individuality, our cherubim and seraphim also then at the very beginning established that still now existing sacred determinator of reason, which is applied for the determination of the gradations of reason, or, more exactly, the totality of self-awareness of all separate large and small cosmic concentrations, and by which not only are the gradations of their reason measured, but there is also determined their, as it is called, degree of justification of the sense and aim of their existence, and also the further role of each separate individual in relation to everything existing in our great megalocosmos. This sacred determinator of pure reason is nothing else than a kind of measure, i.e. a line divided into equal parts. One end of this line is marked as the total absence of any reason, i.e. absolute firm calm, and at the other end there is indicated absolute reason, i.e. the reason of our incomparable Creator Endlessness. In this place I think it might as well be explained to you further about the various kinds of sources present in the common presences of all free brain beings for the manifestation of being reason. In every free brain being in general, irrespective of the place of his arising and the form of his exterior coating, there can be crystallized data for three independent kinds of being mentation, the totality of the engendered results of which expresses the gradation of his reason. Data for these three kinds of being reason are crystallized in the presence of each free-brained being depending upon how much, by means of the being part dog duty, the corresponding higher being parts are coated and perfected in them, which should without fail compose their common presences as a whole. The first highest kind of being reason is the pure or objective reason, which is proper only to the presence of a higher being body, or to the common presences of the bodies themselves of those free brain beings in whom this higher part has already arisen and perfected itself, and then only when it is the what is called centre of gravity initiator of the individual functioning of the whole presence of the being. The second being reason, which is named Okiata Atakasa, can be in the presences of those free brain beings in whom their second being body Keshjan is already completely coated and functions independently. As regards the third kind of being reason, this is nothing else but only the action of the automatic functioning which proceeds in the common presences of all beings in general, and also in the presences of all supplanetary definite formations, thanks to repeated shocks coming from outside, which evoke habitual reactions from the data crystallized in them corresponding to previous accidentally perceived impressions. Now, my boy, in my opinion, before going on to a more detailed explanation of how their higher parts were then coated and perfected in the common presences of the first Tet Art O cosmoses, as well as in the common presences of those who were afterwards named beings, it is necessary to give you more information about the fact that we, beings arisen on the planet Apparatus, and also the beings arisen on your planet called Earth, are already no longer such polymendectic beings as were the first beings who were transformed directly from the tetrartocosmoses, i.e. to say, beings called polymendectic, or as it is still now said, monotheists, but are beings called Gurdjieff, i.e. nearly half beings, owing to which the completing process of the sacred heptaparapassionok does not proceed at the present time through us or through your favourites, the free-brain beings of the planet Earth, exactly as it proceeded in them. And we are such Gurdjieff beings because the last fundamental stopinder of the sacred heptaparapassionok, which at the present time almost all the beings of the megalocosmos called the sacred Asha Jigrotohahi, is not in the centres of those planets upon which we arise, as it occurs in general in the majority of the planets of our great megalocosmos, but is in the centres of their satellites, which for our planet Apparatus is the little planet of our solar system, which we call Pranokapayakch, and for the planet Earth, its former fragments, now called the Moon and Anulius. Thanks to this, the completing process of the sacred heptaparapassionok for the continuation of the species, for instance, proceeds not through one being, as it proceeded with the tetrartocosmoses, but through two beings of different sexes, called by us activus and passivus, and on the planet Earth, man and woman. I might say here that there even exists in our great megalocosmos a planet on which this sacred law heptaparapassionok carries out its completing process for the continuation of the species of the free brain beings through free independent individuals. You might as well be acquainted somewhat in detail with this uncommon planet. This planet is called Modic Theo and belongs to the system of the protocosmos. Beings arising on this planet are free-brained, like all other free-brained beings arising on all the planets of our great megalocosmos, and in their exterior appearance are almost similar to us, and at the same time are, and are also so considered by all others, the most ideal and perfect of all the innumerable various formed exterior coatings of free-brain beings in all our great universe, and all our now existing angels, archangels, and most of the sacred individuals nearest to our common Father Endlessness arise just above this marvellous planet. The transformation through them of the cosmic substances required for the common cosmic trogo-auto-egocratic process, according to the sacred law of heptaparapassionok, proceeds on these same principles on which it proceeds for our common presences, and also through the presences of your favourites, the free brain beings breeding on the planet Earth. For the continuation of their species alone does this sacred law effect its completing process through three kinds of beings. Wherefore, such free brain beings are called triachromnian. Separately, however, just as among us beings of different sexes are called activus and passivus, or are called on your planet man and woman, so there on the planet Modicipio, they call the beings of the different sexes Martna, Spurna, and Okina, and although externally they are all alike, yet in their inner construction they are very different from each other. The process of the continuation of their species proceeds among them in the following manner. All three beings of different sexes simultaneously receive the sacred Elmu Anu, or as your favourites say, conception, through a special action, and for a certain period they exist with this sacred Elmu Anu, or conception, apart from one another, entirely independently, but each of them exists for very definite intentional perceptions and conscious manifestations. And later, when the time approaches for the manifestation of the results of these conceptions, or when, as your favourites say, the time of birth approaches, there becomes evident in all these free uncommon beings, as it is called, an aklonio-astichian longing for each other, or as your favourites would say, there appears in them a physico-organic attraction. And the nearer the time of this being manifestation or birth approaches, the more they press close to each other, and ultimately almost grow onto each other, and thereupon at one and the same time they actualize in a certain way these conceptions of theirs. And so, during the actualization of their conceptions, all these three conceptions merge one with another, and in this way there appears in our megalocosmos a new free-brain being of such an uncommon construction. And free-centered beings of this kind are ideal in our megalocosmos, because at their very arising they already have all the being bodies. And they have all three being bodies because the producers of such a being, namely Martna, Sperna, and Okina, each separately conceived the arising of one of the three being bodies. And owing to their special corresponding being existences, they aid the sacred Heptaparapashinok to form the given being body in themselves to perfection, and afterwards, at the moment of appearance, merge it with the other bodies into one. Note, by the way, my boy, that the beings arising on that incomparable and marvellous planet have no need, like the free-brain beings arising on other ordinary planets of our megalocosmos, to coat their higher being bodies with the help of those factors which our Creator designed as means of perfecting, namely, those factors which we now call conscious labours and intentional suffering. Now, my boy, to continue the further, more detailed elucidation concerning the process of the transformation of cosmic substances through beings in general, we shall take as an elucidatory example the common presences of your favourites. Although the process of the transformation of substances for the continuation of the species by means of us, or by means of the common presences of your favourites, does not proceed exactly as it proceeded in the first tetatocosmoses, who were transformed into beings, nevertheless we shall take them as an example, since the process itself of the transformation of cosmic substances for the needs of the most great common cosmic trogo-auto-egocrat proceeds through their common presences exactly as it proceeded through the first tetatocosmoses. At the same time you will acquire information concerning several other small details of the strange particularities of their psyche, and also gain information relating to how they in general understand and how they regard their being duty in the sense of serving the common cosmic process of Oran Umanj, destroying for the beatification of their own belly every kind of law-conformable, foreseeing actualization for the welfare of the whole megalocosmos. As for those particularities of the transformation of cosmic substances, thanks to which the continuation of the species of different beings at the present time proceeds differently, for the present I will say only this, that the cause depends on the place of concentration of the sacred Ashagi Protihari, i.e., on the place of concentration of those cosmic substances which are the results of the last stopinda in the common cosmic Ansar Baluuzia. Now, my boy, I shall begin by repeating all your favourites, even the contemporary, are like us and like all the other free-centred beings of our megalocosmos, such apparatuses of the great cosmic trogo-auto-egocrat, just as the tetatocosmoses were, from whom arose the first ancestors of the now existing beings, as well as the beings now existing everywhere. And through each of them the cosmic substances arising in all 7 stopindas of the sacred Heptaparapashinok could be transformed, and all of them, again even the contemporary, besides serving as apparatuses for the most great cosmic trogo-auto-egocrat, could have all possibilities for absorbing from those cosmic substances which are transformed through them what is corresponding for the coating and for the perfecting in them of both higher being bodies, because each free-brain being arisen on this planet of yours represents in himself also, in all respects, just as every free-brain being in all our universe, an exact similarity of the whole megalocosmos. The difference between each of them and our common great megalocosmos is only in scale. Here you should know that your contemporary favourites very often use a notion taken by them from somewhere, I do not know whether instinctively, emotionally, or automatically, and expressed by them in the following words: "We are the images of God." These unfortunates do not even suspect that, of everything known to most of them concerning cosmic truths, this expression of theirs is the only true one of them all. And indeed, each of them is the image of God, not of that God which they have in their bob-tailed picturings, but of the real God, by which word we sometimes still call our common megalocosmos. Each of them to the smallest detail is exactly similar, but of course in miniature, to the whole of our megalocosmos, and in each of them there are all of those separate functionings which in our common megalocosmos actualize the cosmic harmonious Iran Uran Umanj, or exchange of substances, maintaining the existence of everything existing in the megalocosmos as one whole. This same expression of theirs, "We are the images of God," can here serve us as a very good additional illustration and explanation of how far what is called perceptible logic, or as it is sometimes still said, amnophonian mentation, is already distorted in them. Although this expression corresponding to the truth exists there among them, yet concerning the consideration of its exact sense, as in general concerning every short verbal formulation, they at best always express with their strange short-sighted mentation, even if they should wish with their whole common presence actively and sincerely to reveal their inner representation and essential understanding of this expression of theirs, something as follows. Good. If we are images of God, that means God is like us and has an appearance also like us, and that means our God has the same moustache, beard, nose as we have, and he dresses also as we do. He dresses as we do, doubtless because, like us, he is also very fond of modesty. It was not for nothing that he expelled Adam and Eve from paradise, only because they lost their modesty and began to cover themselves with clothes. In certain of the beings there, particularly of recent times, their being amnophonian mentation, or perceptible logic, has already become such that they can very clearly see this same God of theirs in their picturings, almost with a comb sticking out of his left vest pocket, with which he sometimes combs his famous beard. Such a super peculiar being amnophonian mentation about their God proceeded in your favourites chiefly from the Hasnamasnian manifestations of those learned beings who, you remember, I've already told you, assembled in the city of Babylon and collectively began to invent various maleficent fictions concerning their God, which were afterwards by chance widely spread everywhere on that ill-fated planet. And in view of the fact that that period coincided with the time when the free-brained beings there began to exist, particularly self-nuolnu, i.e., particularly passively in the sense of the being efforts proper to free-centered beings, therefore these maleficent inventions were thoroughly absorbed and appropriated by the beings. And afterwards, in their transmission from generation to generation by inheritance, they gradually began to be crystallized into such monstrous logic-Nestonian materials, with the result that in the psyche of the contemporary free-brain beings there began to proceed such an already exceptionally distorted being amnophonian mentation. And the reason that they pictured their God to themselves just with a long beard was due to the fact that then, Among the maleficent inventions of the Babylonian learned, it was said, among other things, that that famous god of theirs had, as it were, the appearance of a very old man, just with a heavy beard. But concerning the appearance of their god, your favourites have gone still further. Namely, they picture this famous god of theirs exactly as an old Jew, since in their bob-tailed notions all sacred personages originated from that race. At any rate, my little Hussein, each of your favourites, separately, is, in his whole presence, exactly similar in every respect to our megalocosmos. I once told you that there is localized in the head of each one of them, as well as in us, a concentration of corresponding cosmic substances, all the functioning of which exactly corresponds to all those functions and purposes which our most holy protocosmos has and fulfills for the whole of the megalocosmos. This localization, which is concentrated in their head, they call the head brain. The separate what are called okeaniki, or protoplasts of this localizations in their head, or as the terrestrial learned call them, the cells of the head brain, actualize for the whole presence of each of them exactly such a purpose as is fulfilled at the present time by the higher perfected bodies of free brain beings from the whole of our great universe, who have already united themselves with the most holy Sun Absolute, or protocosmos. When these higher parts of free brain beings who are perfected to the corresponding gradation of objective reason get there, they fulfill precisely that function of the okeaniki, or cells of the head brain, for which function, as I've already said, our uni-being common Father Endlessness condescended at the creation of the now existing world to decide to use for the future those coating who obtain independent individuality in the tetatocosmoses, as an aid for himself in the administration of the enlarging world. Further, in each of them, in their what is called vertebral column, another concentration was localized, called there the spinal marrow, in which there are precisely those what are called denying sources, which actualize in their functionings in relation to the parts of the head brain just such fulfillments as the second order newly arisen sons of the megalocosmos actualize in relation to the most holy protocosmos. It must without fail be noticed that in former epochs there on your planet, your favourites knew something about the separate particular functionings of the parts of their spinal marrow, and they even knew and adopted various mechanical means for action upon corresponding parts of this spinal marrow of theirs, during those periods when some disharmony or other appeared in their, as they express it, psychic state. But the information relating also to this kind of knowledge gradually evaporated, and although your contemporary favourites know that certain particular concentrations are in this spinal marrow of theirs, yet of course they have not the slightest notion for what function they were designed by great nature, and in most cases simply name them brain nodes of their spinal marrow. Well then, just these separate brain nodes of their spinal marrow are the sources of denial in relation to the separate shades of affirmation in their head brain, precisely as the separate second-order suns are the sources of the various shades of denial in relation to the various shades of affirmation of the most holy protocosmos. And finally, just as in the megalocosmos, all the results attained by the flow of the fundamental process of the sacred heptaparapassionok from the affirmation of the most holy protocosmos and from the various shades of denial of the newly created suns began to serve thereafter as a reconciling principle for everything newly arising and already existing, so that in them also there is a corresponding localization for the concentration of all results obtained from the affirmation of the head brain and from all the shades of denial of the spinal marrow, which results afterwards serve as a regularizing or reconciling principle for the functionings of the whole common presence of each of them. Concerning the place of concentration of this localization, which serves the common processes of terrestrial free brain beings as a regularizing or reconciling principle. It must be noticed that in the beginning these free-brain beings of the planet Earth, who have taken your fancy, also had this third concentration, similarly to us, in the form of an independent brain localized in the region of their what is called breast. But from the time when the process of their ordinary being existence began particularly sharply to change for the worse, their nature there, by certain causes flowing from the common cosmic trogo-auto-egocratic process, was compelled, without destroying the functioning itself of this brain of theirs, to change the system of its localization. That is to say, she gradually dispersed the localization of this organ, which had had its concentration in one place in them, into small localizations over the whole of their common presence, but chiefly in the region of what is called the pit of the stomach. The totality of these small localizations in this region they themselves at the present time call the solar plexus, or the complex of the nose of the sympathetic nervous system. And in those nervous nodes scattered over the whole of the planetary body, there are accumulated at the present time all the results obtained from the affirming and denying manifestations of their head brain and spinal marrow. And these results, having become fixed in these nervous nodes scattered over the whole of their common presence, are later also such a neutralizing principle in the further process of affirmation and denial between the head brain and spinal marrow, just as the totality of everything arising in the megalocosmos is the neutralizing force in the process of the affirmation of the protocosmos and the various shades of denials of all the newly arisen suns. And so the free-brain beings of the planet Earth are not only, as we also are, apparatuses for the transformation of the cosmic substances required for the most great trogo-auto-egocrat, with the qualities of all the free forces of the fundamental common cosmic triomazicamno, but also themselves absorbing these substances for transformation from three different sources of independent arisings, have all the possibilities of assimilating besides the substances necessary for the maintenance of their own existence, also those substances which go for the coating and perfecting of their own higher being bodies. In this manner, those free source substances entering their common presences for transformation are, just as for us, a threefold kind of being food. That is to say, those substances which, on the path of their returning evolutionary ascent from the sacred Ashigio-Pratihari, i.e. from the last stopinder of the fundamental sacred Heptaparapashinok towards the most holy protocosmos, were transmitted with the aid of their own planet itself into definite higher correspondence of planetary formations, and enter into them for further transformations as their first being food, which is their ordinary food and drink. But those second source substances, which, being obtained from the transformations of their own sun, and of all the outer planets of their own solar system, and which entered the atmosphere of their planet through the irradiations of the latter, enter into them again, just as into us, also for further evolutionary transformation, as the second being food, which is their, as they say there, air, by which they breathe. And these substances in the air just serve for the coating and maintenance of the existence of their second being bodies. And finally, the first source substances, which for them as well as for us are a third kind of being food, serve both for the coating and for the perfecting of the higher being body itself. Well then, it was in relation to those sacred cosmic substances that those sorrowful results occurred among your unfortunate favourites, which flowed and still continue to flow from all the abnormalities established by them themselves in the ordinary process of their being existence. Although the substances also of this higher being food continue to enter into them also until now, yet they enter particularly into the beings of the present time, already only spontaneously, quite without the participation of their cognized intention, and only as much as is required for the transformations proceeding through them necessary for the purposes of the common cosmic trogo-auto-egocratic harmony, and for the automatic continuation of their species demanded by nature. When the abnormal conditions of ordinary being existence were finally fixed there, in consequence of which there disappeared from their essence both the instinctive and the intentional striving for perfection, there not only disappeared in them the need of conscious absorption of cosmic substances, but even also the very knowledge and understanding of the existence and significance of higher being foods. At the present time there, your favourites already know only of one, the first being food, and they know about that only because, in the first place, even without their wish, they could not help knowing about it, and secondly, the process of its use there has already become for them also a vice, and occupies an equal rightful place alongside other of their weaknesses, which were gradually crystallized in them as consequences of the properties of the maleficent for them organ Kunderbuffer. Up to this time, not one of them has yet even become aware that in this first being food there are substances necessary almost exclusively only for the maintenance of the existence of their coarse planetary body alone, which is a denying source, and that this first being food can give almost nothing for the other higher parts of their presence. As for those higher cosmic substances of which a certain quantity must, as I've already said, necessarily be transformed through them for the continuation of their species, and for the maintenance of the general harmony of the common cosmic assembly-uaza, your favourites at the present time have no need at all to trouble their inner god self-calming about it, since this is already done in them, as I have already said, quite spontaneously, without the participation of their own cognized intention. It is interesting, however, to notice that in the beginning, namely, soon after the destruction of the functioning of the organ Kunderbuffer in the free-brain beings breeding on this planet of yours, they also became aware of these two higher being foods, and then began to use them with cognized intention, and certain beings of the continent Atlantis of its latest period even began to consider these same processes of the absorption of these higher being foods as the chief aim of their existence. The beings of the continent Atlantis then called the second being food Armalos, which meant help for the moon, and they called the third being food the sacred Armahudian, and this last word then signified for them help for God. Concerning the absence in the psyche of your favourites of a cognized need of absorbing these higher sacred cosmic substances, I wish also to draw your attention to one very important for them sorrowful consequence flowing from this, and namely, in view of the fact that in them, together with the cessation of the intentional absorption of these definite cosmic substances necessary for the arising and existence of higher being parts, there disappeared from their common presences not only the striving itself for perfection, but also the possibility of what is called intentional contemplativeness, which is just the principal factor for the assimilation of those sacred cosmic substances. Then, from that time on, in order to guarantee that the required quantity of those substances might enter into them and be assimilated, nature gradually had to adapt herself to arrange that for each of them, in the course of their whole process of existence, such unexpectednesses should occur already by themselves, as are not at all proper to occur to any free-brain being of our great megalocosmos. Unfortunately, nature there was compelled to adapt herself to this abnormality, so that, owing to these unexpectednesses, certain intense being experiencings and active deliberations might proceed in them automatically, independently of them themselves, and so that, owing to these active deliberations, the required transformation and assimilation of these necessary sacred particles of the higher being foods might automatically proceed in them. Now, my boy, As for the processes themselves of the transformation in the evolutionary and involutionary movements of all these cosmic substances by means of just such apparatuses of the most great common cosmic trogo-auto-egocrat, as all your favourites also are, then those transformations proceed in them as well as in us, and in general in all large and small cosmoses of our common megalocosmoses, strictly according to those two same chief fundamental cosmic laws, namely according to the sacred heptaparapashinok and the sacred triomazzi-kamno. Before talking to you about the manner in which the cosmic substances entering into beings as their first being food are transformed in them for the purposes of the common cosmic trogo-auto-egocratic process, and which enter into free brain beings, if they have a certain kind of attitude towards this process, also for the coating and the perfecting of their own higher parts, it is necessary for you to bear in mind, for a clear representation of these processes, that in our megalocosmoses, from results which have already flowed from every kind of trogo-auto-egocratic process, there are many hundreds of independent active elements with various specific subjective properties which take part in new formations. These many hundreds of active elements with various properties, wherever they might be, proceeding from the 7 stopinders of the fundamental common cosmic sacred heptaparapashinok, are, depending upon which stopinders they receive their primordial arising, divided and localized, according to what is called the affinity of vibrations, into 7 what are called octopanasactinian classes, and all, without exception of both the large and small, already definite concentrations in all our megalocosmos, are formed from these active elements belonging to 7 independent classes, and, as I've already told you, they have their own subjective properties. And these subjective properties of theirs, and likewise their what are called proportions of vivifyingness, are actualized firstly according to what form of functioning of the 5th stopinder of the sacred heptaparapashinok was flowing during their arising, and secondly, whether the given active elements arise owing to the conscious intention on the part of some independent individual, or whether they arose automatically merely owing to the 2nd grade law called attraction and fusion of similarities. Well then, these same many hundreds of definite active elements belonging to 7 different octopanstinsanian classes, and having 7 different subjective properties, among which the properties of vivifyingness and decomposition have supreme significance, compose in their totality the fundamental, common cosmic ansibaliosia, by which the most great cosmic trogo-auto-egocrat is actualized, the true saviour from the law-conformable action of the merciless hieropath. It is necessary to tell you also that the first appearance of every kind of concentration from the etherochrono, which is found everywhere in the universe owing to the 2nd grade cosmic law, the attraction and fusion of similarities, proceeds in the following manner. If particles of etherochrono, which are already found in the different spheres of all 7 stopinders of the fundamental common cosmic ansibaliosia, collide for some reason or another, they begin the arising of all kinds of crystallizations which do not yet have any subjective properties, and furthermore, if these particles of etherochrono fall for some reason or other into conditions where a process of Hanu-Marsanel proceeds, they fuse into one, and owing to what are called complexion vibrations acquired in them, are transformed into active elements already with definite specific properties. And if, therefore, these already definite active elements with their own specific subjective properties enter into other processes of Hanu-Marsanel, which have other conditions, they again fuse with each other according to the same law of affinity of vibrations, and thus acquiring other properties, are transformed into active elements of another octopananatisacnean class, and so on and so forth. And that is why there are in our megalocosmos so many independent active elements with their different specific subjective properties. And if now, my boy, you satisfactorily grasp the succession of the process of transformation of cosmic substances by means of beings' apparatuses, into which these cosmic substances enter at first being food, then at the same time you will approximately understand everything concerning the chief particularity of the sacred law of heptaparapashinok, as well as the processes of evolution and involution of the other higher being foods. When these evolving active elements, in their returning ascent from the last stopinder of the fundamental common cosmic sacred heptaparapashinok, enter into the common presences of being apparatuses as their first being food, they begin already from the mouth itself with the help of the processes of the second grade law Harnal Martsanal, that is, owing to mixture and fusion according to the affinity of vibrations, with the active elements which have already evolved in the presences of the beings, and have acquired vibrations corresponding to the subsequent stopinders of the being heptaparapashinok, to be gradually changed, and are transmuted this time in the stomach of the beings into definite active elements named being proteohari, which correspond in their vibrations to the ascending fourth stopinder of the fundamental common cosmic heptaparapashinok. From there, this totality, which has the gravity center vibration of being proteohari, passing, thanks again only to the process Harnal Martsanal, over the whole of what is called the intestinal tract, and gradually evolving, completely acquires in consequence corresponding vibrations, and is this time completely transmuted in what is called the duodenum into being Deftahari. Further, a part of these definite substances of being Deftahari go to serve the planetary body itself, and also the local Harnal Martsanal, in respect of the newly entering food. But on the other part, also by means of a process of Harnal Martsanal of local character, continues its independent evolution and is ultimately transmuted in beings into the still higher definite substances, which are called this time being Tritohari. And this totality of cosmic substances, temporarily crystallized in the common presences of beings' apparatuses, which correspond in their vibrations to being Tritohari, have, as the gravity center place of their concentration, in the processes of beings what is called liver. It is just in this place of the being Ansabalazia that the lower Medinal of the sacred heptaparapashinok is located, called the mechano-coinciding Medinal, and therefore the substances of the being Tritohari cannot, only owing to the process Harnal Martsanal, independently evolve further. Well then, owing to that change in the general function of the primordial common cosmic sacred law of heptaparapashinok, this totality of substances, named being Tritohari, can in the given case evolve further from this state only with the help of forces coming from outside. That is why in this case, if this totality of substances of being Protohari does not receive foreign help from outside for its further evolution in the common presences of the beings, then both this totality and all the definite centres of gravity of the being and Sanbalyaza crystallized up to it always involve back again into those definite cosmic crystallizations from which they began their evolution. For this help coming from outside, great nature in the given case most wisely adapted the inner organization of beings in such a manner that the substances which had to enter into the common presences of beings for the coating and feeding of their second being bodies Keshjan namely that totality of cosmic substances, which your favourites call air, might at the same time serve as just such a help coming from outside for the evolution of the substances of the first being food. The active elements which compose this second being food or air, and which enter into the presences of beings also for evolution through this second being food, beginning from the nose of beings, gradually evolve with the cooperation of various processes of harnial marxanal, of local character, and are also transmuted this time in the what are called lungs of beings into proto-hari, but into proto-hari called astronomanian proto-hari. And then the substances of this astronomanian proto-hari entering into the presences of beings for their own evolution, and having still in themselves, according to the sacred Heptaparapassionok, all the possibilities of evolving from their centres of gravity by the process of harnal miartsnal alone, mix with the totality of substances of the first being food which have already evolved up to the third stopinder of the sacred being Heptaparapassionok, and further evolve together, and thus help these substances of the first being food to pass through the lower mechano-coinciding modernal in, and to be transmuted into other definite substances, into being tetero-hari, and the astronomanian proto-hari itself is transmuted into the substances named astronomanian deftero-hari. At this point in my explanations, you can have one more clarifying example for a full understanding of the difference between auto-egocrat and trogo-auto-egocrat. That is, of the difference between the former maintaining system of the existence of the Sun Absolute, when that system was auto-egocratic, and the other system now called trogo-auto-egocratic, which became after the creation of the megalocosmos. If the transformation of substances through beings' apparatuses proceeded according to the law of the sacred Heptaparapassionok, when certain of its stopinders were not yet changed, that is, as it still functioned before the creation of our now existing megalocosmos, then the cosmic substances composing the first being food, entering into such apparatuses cosmoses for the local process of evolution, would accomplish their ascent up to their completing transmutation into other higher definite active elements without any obstacle and without any help coming from outside, merely by the process of harnal miartsnal alone. But now, since the independent functioning of this primordial sacred law has been changed into a dependent functioning, the evolution or involution in its changed stompinders must always be dependent upon external, extraneously caused manifestations. In the given case, this extraneously caused help for the complete transmutation of cosmic crystallizations through beings into higher crystallizations is the second being food, which has entirely different causes of its arising, and which must actualize entirely different cosmic results. I will sometime later explain to you in detail how the transformation of the substances of the second and first being food proceeds in beings, but meanwhile note only that these higher cosmic substances in beings are transformed according to exactly the same principles as the substances of the first being food. Now we shall continue to investigate just how, according to the sacred Heptaparapassionok, the further completing process of the transformation of the substances of their first being food proceeds in the presences of beings' apparatuses. And so, the ordinary first being food is thus gradually transmuted in beings into definite substances called being tetatahari, which have in beings, just as of course in your favourites, as the central place of their concentration both of what are called the hemispheres of their head brain. Further, a part of this being tetatahari from both hemispheres of their head brain goes unchanged to serve the planetary body of the given being, but the other part, having in itself all the possibilities for independent evolution, continues to evolve without any help coming from outside, and mixing again by means of the process harnal with previously formed higher substances already present in the beings. It is gradually transmuted into still higher definite being active elements called pianjohari. And these substances have as the central place of their concentration in beings what is called Xianora Neon, or as your favourites call this part of their planetary body, the cerebellum, which in beings is also located in the head. Just these same substances in beings, according to the fifth deflection of the sacred Heptaparapashinok, have the free possibility of giving, in the manifestations of the common presences of free brain beings, results not similar but opposite to each other. That is why, in respect of these being substances, the beings themselves must always be very, very much on their guard in order to avoid undesirable consequences for their entire whole. From the cerebellum of beings, a part of these definite substances also goes to serve the planetary body itself, but the other part, passing in a particular way through the nerve nodes of the spine and the breast, is concentrated in the beings of the male sex, in what are called testicles, and in the beings of the female sex, in what most of your favourites call ovaries, which are the place of concentration in the common presences of beings of the being Exiohari, which is for the beings themselves their most sacred possession. You should know that this particular way mentioned is called Trinolva. Only after this are the cosmic substances which enter beings' apparatuses for the purpose of evolution, that is, for the possibility of passing the lower medallion in of the fundamental common cosmic exchange of substances, transformed into that definite totality of cosmic substances, which transformation is the lot of all beings in general, and also of your contemporary free-brain beings who breed on the planet Earth in particular for the automatic justification of the sense and aim of their existence. And this totality of cosmic substances is everywhere called Exiohari. And so, my boy, this totality of their first being food, which results from the evolution in these beings' apparatuses, corresponds with its vibrations to the last stopinder of the being Heptaparapashinok, and according to the particularity of this stopinder, it enters the higher, intentionally actualizing medallion of the law of Heptaparapashinok, and in order to transform completely into new higher substances, and in order to acquire vibrations corresponding to the vibrations of the next higher vivifyingness, namely, corresponding to the fifth stopinder of the fundamental process of the common cosmic sacred Heptaparapashinok, it inevitably requires just that foreign help which is actualized only in the presences of the free brain beings, exclusively owing to those factors mentioned by me more than once, and which are manifested in the being part dog duty, that is owing to just those factors which our common Father Creator Endlessness consented to foreordain to by the means by which certain of the Tetato cosmoses, as a final result of their serving the purposes of the common cosmic Iranu Manj, might become helpers in the ruining of the enlarged world, and which factors also until now serve as the sole purpose means for the assimilation of the cosmic substances required for the coating and perfecting of the higher being bodies, and which we at the present time call conscious labours and intentional suffering. Here it might as well be noticed and emphasized that of all the definite cosmic substances which are formed and in consequence are always present in the common presences of your favourites, they well know only this being Exiohari, which they call sperm, and even masterfully perform with its various kinds of their manipulations. And by this name sperm they give importance to the totality of the definite substances formed only in the presences of the beings of the male sex, and ignore namelessly and with scorn a similar totality of the sum of the substances which arise in beings of the female sex. Just this same totality of substances which inevitably always arises as the final sum in the presences of all beings from their first being food, become one of the chief causes of the factor that later, when they cease to actualize being part dog duty in their common presences, and this totality of cosmic substances in consequence did not receive, according to the sacred Heptapara Pashinok, the required foreign help for their completing evolution into other definite, higher, active elements, it began to evolve back in them towards those crystallizations from which their evolution began. And such evolutionary processes in them began from this time to serve their common presences as factors which began to engender in their common presences the data for the arising of their innumerable, what they call illnesses, and thus on the one hand began to de-perfect their previously established essence individuality, and on the other hand to shorten the general duration of their existence. And your favourites, the beings of the planet Earth, particularly the beings of the present time, do not use these same substances of being exiohari at all consciously, neither for self-perfecting nor for conscious reproduction outside of themselves of new beings similar to themselves. And these sacred cosmic substances formed in them in such a manner serve either only for the purposes of the most great cosmic trogo auto-egocrat, entirely without the participation of their own being consciousness and individual desire, or for the involutionary conception of a new being similar to themselves, who is without their cognized wish a distressing result for them from the mixing of these sacred substances of the two opposite sexes, who actualize in themselves two opposite forces of the sacred triome Masikamno, during the satisfaction by them of that function of theirs, which has become, thanks to the inheritance from the ancient Romans, the chief vice of contemporary free-brain beings. I must sadly remark that the mentioned deprived inherency already completely fixed in their common presences is for them, particularly for your contemporary favourites, already an automatically acting means of destroying to their very root even those impulses which sometimes arise in them from manifestations worthy of free-brain beings, and which evoke in them the what is called thirst for being. I repeat, my boy, besides the fact that these favourites of yours, particularly the contemporary, cease to use these sacred substances inevitably formed in them, consciously for the coating and perfection of their higher parts, as well as for the fulfilment of their being duty foreseen by nature herself, which consists in the continuation of their species. Yet even when this latter does accidentally proceed, they already accept it and regard it as a very great misfortune for themselves, chiefly because the consequences which must proceed from it must for a certain time hinder the free gratification of the multitudinous and multiform vices fixed in their essence. And in consequence of this, they, particularly the contemporary beings, strive in these cases by every means to prevent with their whole presence the actualization of such an accidental and on their part unintentional sacred manifestation foreseen by great nature. In the last centuries there, very many among them, in whom data for all kinds of Hasnamasnian properties were more strongly crystallized, even became specialists in aiding the destruction of such accidentally actualized sacred being fulfillments, and these specialists they call their makers of angels. Whereas this same being act, which for your favourites has been turned into their chief vice, constitutes and is considered everywhere in our great universe for beings of all kinds of natures as the most sacred of all sacred divine sacraments. Even many two-brained and one-brained beings of this same planet, such as for instance the beings called their hyenas, cats, wolves, lions, tigers, wild dogs, bagushis, frogs, and many others who have not in their what are called law-conformable presences any data at all which give the possibility of comparative logic, at the present time still continue, of course only instinctively, to sense this act as sacred, and manifest it only during those periods which were foredesigned by great nature for this sacred sacrament, namely, chiefly at the period of the beginning of a new completing movement of that cosmic concentration on which they have their place of arising in existence. That is, during the period which free-brained beings everywhere call the Diagnostics of the sacred sacraments of Ceruz Azar, and which on the planet which has interested you are called spring days. Perhaps, my boy, you do not yet know anything about the sacred sacraments of the great Ceruz Azar, Beelzebub asked his grandson. To this question of Beelzebub's, his grandson Hussein replied thus: No, dear grandfather, the details of this I do not yet know. I only know that these Diagnostics are regarded among us on the planet Apparatus as great holy days, and are called helping God Diagnostics. And I know that for these great holy days, the Diagnostics, all our beings, activus as well as passivus, prepare themselves almost from the end of the previous holy day, and that one Lunarius before the beginning of these sacred sacraments, both old and young among us cease to introduce the first being food into themselves, and by various sacred ceremonies mentally give thanks to our common Creator for their existence. I also know that the last two of these solemn Diagnostics are considered and called among us the Diagnostics for the glorifying of the first producer of each family. And that is why, my dear grandfather, every year during these Diagnostics we all remembered and talked only of you, and each one of us strove with his whole being to manifest the sincere wish that your destiny may constantly create for you those conditions of being existence which may aid you quickly and easily to bring your reason up to the required sacred gradation, and that thereby you might the sooner finish your present ordinary being existence, personally burdensome for you. With these last solemnly pronounced words, Hussein ended his reply. Very well, my boy, said Beelzebub. We will talk about the sacred sacrament of the Zura Azar when we return to our dear Apparatus. There I will explain to you sometime in detail where and how the sacred sacrament of Zuru Azar proceeds with the substances being exiohari for the continuation of one species, and on what occasions and in what way the mixing and subsequent results of the two kinds of exiohari obtained. One kind is transformed for the affirming principle in those being apparatuses, which on our planet Apparatus are the beings activus, and on your planet Earth the beings of the male sex. And the other kind is transformed for the denying principle in those being apparatuses, which among us on the planet Apparatus are the beings passivus, and on the planet Earth the beings of the female sex. Come now, and let us talk about these higher perfected being bodies, that is, about souls, who came onto this holy planet Purgatory, to which all my foregoing explanations have referred. And so, from the very beginning, when these higher being parts arose in this way, and were perfected in beings to the required sacred gradation of objective reason, that is to say, when in accordance with the lower mentation of the sacred heptapara passionok, the body Keshjan was, thanks to the second being food formed in beings, and in accordance with the higher mentation of the same sacred law, the third highest being body was, thanks to the third being food, coated and perfected, and when these completely perfected higher being parts were divided from the lower being parts, then they were deemed worthy to be immediately united with the most holy prime source, and began to fulfill their divine, foreordained purpose. This continued so right up to that time when that terrifying cosmic event occurred, which, as I have already told you, is now called the Chute God liturgical period. Until this common cosmic misfortune, all the higher being bodies which arose and were perfected in certain tertato cosmoses and in their first generations were united immediately with the most holy protocosmos itself, because their common presences had already actualized results fully corresponding to it. The point is that before this terrifying cosmic event of which I am speaking, the sacred Theomertma Logos, which issued from the most holy Son Absolute, was still in a pure state without the admixture of any extraneously caused arisings whatsoever with their own subjective properties. And when this sacred Theo-Mert-Logos came into the spheres of those planets on which the sacred crystallizations arose, and from the results of the transformations of which higher being bodies were coated and perfected through being's apparatuses, then these latter received their presences exactly as they had to correspond to the required conditions of existence in the sphere of the most holy Sun Absolutes. But afterwards, when the mentioned common cosmic misfortune occurred, on account of which the sacred Theo-Mert-Logos began to issue from the most holy Sun Absolute, with the admixture of subjective properties of extraneously caused arisings, then from that time these sacred cosmic arisings ceased to have the possibility of corresponding to the required conditions of existence in the sphere of the most holy Prime Source. And this admixture of extraneously caused arisings began to be obtained in the sacred Theo-Mert-Logos, owing to the following, and I must add unforeseen causes. When each separate higher perfected being body becomes an independent individual and acquires in itself in its own law of sacred triomasikamno, it begins to emanate similarly to the most holy Sun Absolute, but in miniature. And when many of these perfected, independent, sacred individuals have been assembled on the most holy Sun Absolute, then between the emanations of these sacred individuals and the atmosphere of the most holy Sun Absolute, there is established what is called a geneo-triomasikamnian contact. And those results were obtained which brought on this terrifying misfortune for the higher being perfected parts, of which I've already told you. Thereupon the action of the results of the geneo-triomasikamnian contact soon became harmonized with the already existing actions of our most holy Sun Absolute itself. And from that time the sacred Theo-Mert-Logos began to issue changed, but nevertheless the primary consequences of the results of this contact had already had time during a certain period to change the harmonious movement of many solar systems and to produce a disharmony in the inner function of certain of their planets. It was just then that there became separated from the solar system called Calamity, that famous planet which exists alone in space and has quite exceptional particularities, and which is at the present time called remorse of conscience. This geneo-triomasikamnian contact occurred because in the atmosphere itself of the most holy Sun Absolute, various sourced unusual vibrations began, as I've already said, to issue from these higher being bodies and to unite with the emanations of the most holy Sun Absolute, and together with them also to penetrate everywhere in the megalocosmos and to reach even to those planets on which higher being bodies were continuing to arise in beings. And these unusual vibrations began to be transformed and crystallized together with the sacred Theo-Mert-Logos, and to take part in the coating of the higher parts in the beings. And it was from this time on that these sacred arisings began to have in their presences special properties which were obtained from this, that certain manifestations of other parts of the given being, in whom these sacred arisings were coated, began to enter and to be assimilated in the composition of the presences of these higher parts, and to give also very unusual results which afterwards came to be called, and are called until now, sins of the body of the soul. Just these same various results served as a cause for this, that these cosmic formations, even if they had in their perfecting reached to the required gradation of objective reason, yet they had ceased to correspond in their common presences to the conditions of existence in the sphere of the most holy protocosmos, and from that time on they lost the possibility of being deemed worthy to unite themselves with it. Well then, when this helpless position of these higher being bodies, who had become independent cosmic sacred individuals perfected in reason, but who were not corresponding in their presences, first became apparent, our all-loving Creator, being infinitely just and merciful, quickly began to take all corresponding measures concerning such an unforeseen and sorrowful phenomenon. This grievous phenomenon of the sacred individuals put them indeed in a helpless position, because, although having no possibility on account of those mentioned sins in their presences of uniting with the bosom of the prime source of the whole, they at the same time, having attained that gradation of the sacred measure of reason, which brings them into subjection to the second grade cosmic law named Tetzenda, had lost the possibility of free existence on the surface of ordinary planets. Then, among the various divine measures undertaken, there followed his decree to choose the very best planet in the whole of our great megalocosmos, specially to arrange its surface, and to leave it for the free further existence of these higher being bodies who were perfected in reason, so that in this way they might receive all the possibilities of self-purification from the undesirable elements which were in their presences. So then, from that time on, this holy planet arose with the name of Purgatory, and its chief organisation and government was undertaken at his own wish by our all-quarters maintainer, the great arch-cherub, Gurdjieff, that same great Gurdjieff, who, after the creation of the world, first merited the sacred Anklad, that is, first acquired that degree of reason which alone it is, in general, possible for an independent individual, whatever his nature, to attain, and which is third in degree after the absolute reason of our endlessness. Although this holy planet is indeed the very best in every respect, as you have seen yourself, and everything on its exterior is exclusively of such a kind that it is always perceived by each independent individual, as I've already said, that is, beautifully, delightfully, yet to those perfected higher being bodies existing there this is of no account, since they are always deeply absorbed in their intense work in purifying themselves from those undesirable elements which have entered their presences from causes totally foreign to their individuality. In the common presences of these unfortunate higher being bodies now existing on this holy planet, perfected in reason to the highest limit attainable by ordinary higher cosmic individuals, there is only this single datum, which sometimes engenders in them the impulse of hope, and that is that they may at some time purify themselves and obtain the happiness of uniting with and becoming a part of that greatness which our omnipotent, all-just common Father Endlessness actualizes for the welfare and happiness of everything existing in our great megalocosmos. Here it is interesting to notice that almost all free-brained beings arising on all the various planets of our great megalocosmos either know of or instinctively sense the holy planet Purgatory. It is only the free-brained beings arising on your planet who do not know of it. However, only most of those who arose towards the end of the existence of the continent Atlantis, and after its loss, did not and do not know of it. As soon as all free-brained beings at our megalocosmos, without distinction of exterior coating, acquire any degree of self-awareness, they already begin consciously or instinctively to dream of going on to that holy planet, in order later to have the happiness to become a particle of that greatness, the blending with which must sooner or later be the lot of every already arisen essence. And free-brained beings who have attained to an already greater self-awareness always eagerly and even joyfully permit during their ordinary being existence for the realization of these dreams of theirs, those unpleasantnesses to their presences which proceed from the accepted privations to their planetary body, because such beings already well understand and instinctively feel that this lower being body of theirs is, in their own sacred cosmic law of Triomasi Kamno, the indispensable source for a certain kind of denying manifestation, and as such, of course, always must and will manifest only as denying for their affirming part, that is, that the manifestation of this lowest part of theirs must obligatorily be always opposite to what is required for them by their higher being part. In other words, every wish of the planetary body is taken as undesirable for the higher divine part, which has to be coated and perfected, and therefore all free-centered beings of our great megalocosmos constantly carry on a relentless struggle against the wishes of their planetary bodies, so that there should be formed in them, in this struggle from the what is called disputer-cranian friction, those sacred crystallizations from which their higher divine being part arises and is perfected in them. In this constant struggle of theirs, the equilibrating, harmonizing principle is their second being body, which, in their own individual law of triomasi-kamno, represents the neutralizing source. And therefore, this second being part always remains indifferent to their mechanical manifestations, but for all their active manifestations it always tends according to the second grade cosmic law, erdek palifata, to unite with those desires of which there are more, whether in one or the other of the two mentioned opposite being parts. As I have already said in the beginning, that is to say before the loss of the continent Atlantis, the free-brained beings of your planet too also had an approximate understanding of the holy planet Purgatory, and there even then existed several legomanisms concerning it. And after the loss of that continent, certain partial legomanisms concerning this holy planet Purgatory also survived through learned beings of that time, who were by chance saved and began to be transmitted there from generation to generation. But later, when, in the psyche of these strange free-brain beings there, that peculiar illness of theirs which I characterized by the words to wiseacre began to arise, then they began their wiseacrings with the partial information which had reached them, and from this partial authentic information concerning the holy planet Purgatory, there began to be formed and to be fixed, in the psyche of beings of subsequent generations, data for engendering such representations and understandings as are ideally defined by a certain exclamation of our highly esteemed, incomparable Mullah Nasir ad-Din, which consists of the following being consonants: Trekta Zot. And as for those partial legomanisms concerning the holy planet, which continue to be transmitted from generation to generation through genuine initiates there, they having reached unchanged to a very recent epoch, that is, to what is called the Babylonian epoch, also began, owing to what I called the agitation of mind, which then seized everyone and which arose in this Babylon, as I have already related to you, on account of learned beings there of new formation, who had various inherencies unbecoming to free-brain beings, to be gradually distorted, and ultimately completely, as it is said, to wither. The point is that, in spite of the fact that the initiates of that epoch were still relatively normal, responsible beings, who did not easily change their ideals, as is done there at the present time by the majority of contemporary beings, just as they themselves express it, the London Bouffou-Cli changed their gloves, yet during this period, the psychosis which seized all these strange free-brain beings of finding out at whatever cost whether they had a soul and whether it was immortal was so strong and widespread that this unhealthy need of their psyche stirred and infected the minds of even the genuine initiates there, and they, having fallen under the influence of this psychosis, mixed into the legomanisms concerning the holy planet Purgatory, and handed down such a cabor tribor that the tale of our Lucifer from pleasurable emotion turned a shade of what is called the calatango. The confusion of the minds of the initiated beings of the planet Earth of that time occurred, in my opinion, chiefly because of that beautiful theory of the Babylonian dualists, in which was said that in some other world, as it were, paradise and hell exist. Just these same two expressions, namely paradise and hell, served, in my opinion, as the cause of all the subsequent twaddle. The point is that in one of the legomanisms about the holy planet Purgatory, both of these words, paradise and hell, were also used. I do not know whether these two words were taken from the legalism concerning the Holy Planet, or whether they were obtained by a chance coincidence. By these same two words, the two following conceptions were expressed in the legalism about the Holy Planet Purgatory. By the word Paradise, the magnificence and richness which are on that holy planet were defined, and by the word Hell, that inner state indeed experienced by the higher being bodies who dwell there, and namely the state of constant anguish, grief and oppression. And in one of the legalisms, the causes for this state of theirs were even explained in detail, that is, that these higher being parts or souls have ultimately fallen after an inexpressible, consciously suffering labours onto this holy planet, and having seen and understood the reality and significance of everything existing, and chiefly seeing our common Father Endlessness himself so near and so often, they have become aware that on account of the undesirable elements present in them, they are still unable to help him in the fulfilment of his most sacred tasks for the good of our whole megalocosmos. And so those two words then, evidently, were just the causes why the poor initiates at that time, when infected by the general psychosis, imagined that the same things were talked of in that fantastic, beautiful theory of the Babylonian future has no masses, but only in greater detail, and they began half-consciously to insert certain details of this fantastic theory into the legalisms concerning the Holy Planet, and afterwards these informations, passing from generation to generation, blossomed out with the additions of these fancies, which again our dear Mullah Nasir ad-Din expresses by the one word, Kamel Kanata Tona Shana Shamamaka. According to what I've just told you, my boy, you can in general judge what kind of understandings and representations they have at the present time there on your planet about what are called questions of the beyond. It can truly be said that if these understandings and notions of your eccentrics about their questions of the beyond were held by our hens, they would begin to laugh so hard that the same thing might happen to them from their laughter as happens there among your favourites from what is called castor oil. For a better sensing and cognizing, and at the same time for a better fairy-like illumination of the meaning of these expressions which I just used, hen's laughter and castor oil, I must tell you about some other consequences which flowed from always the same cunning wise acring of these favourites of yours, in this case concerning the question of the being Exiohari, the more so since the knowledge about this will give you additional data for elucidating, by a concrete example, certain particularities which I've already explained to you, of the fundamental cosmic sacred law of Heptapara Pashinok. After the loss of the continent Atlantis, certain knowledge concerning the origin and significance of this same being Exiohari also survived, and this knowledge also began to pass from generation to generation. And so, about 30 or 35 of their centuries ago, when after a big process of reciprocal destruction, the majority of them again began, as it usually happens there in general after these terrifying excesses, often to see reality and to be less satisfied with the conditions of their ordinary existence. It so happened that the surviving fragments of the knowledge concerning the significance of being Exiohari reached in their authentic form to certain of them who had particularly strongly sensed the emptiness of their existence, and who had begun to seek possibilities by which they could somehow fill up this emptiness. In these, though fragmentary yet nevertheless authentic informations, it was very convincingly indicated that by means of the substances Exiohari, or sperm formed in them, it was possible to perfect oneself. But unfortunately for them, there were no indications, in this information which had survived and reached them, what and how precisely had to be done. Then certain of them began to think and to strive persistently somehow to understand what was necessary to be done, in order by means of these substances inevitably formed in their presence to struggle for self-perfection. The result of these serious ponderings of theirs was that the conviction at first arose in them that this self-perfection could probably be actualized by itself. By abstaining from the ejection from oneself in the customary manner of these substances formed in them called sperm, and certain of them decided to unite and exist together, in order to convince themselves in practice whether such abstinence could indeed give the supposed results. However hard these same beings of your planet who were first interested in this question strove to get clear about this, they arrived at nothing, and it was only the second generation of them who ultimately, after long conscious observations and intensive active mentations, categorically understood that this was indeed possible, exclusively only on condition of a ceaseless fulfilment of being part dog duty, and those of them being of the said generation as well as certain of the subsequent 2 generations who began seriously to actualize this did indeed attain the expected results. But already the 4th generation of those beings who were first interested in this question and who were followers, not from essence conviction, but from a property called to imitate, which had by that time also become inherent in these terrestrial free-brain beings, also began to exist together and to do as it were the same thing. So from that time it began, and until now automatically continues, that such followers organize themselves in separate groups and sometimes form solid sects of various denominations, and putting this same abstinence as the basis of their aim, exist together segregated. Just these same places of theirs for segregated common existence together are called their monasteries, and the separate beings belonging to these sects monks. At the present time, very many of these monasteries exist there, and these innumerable monks who enter them do indeed strictly abstain from the ejection from themselves in the customary way of the being exiohari, or sperm formed in them. But of course no sensible result at all is ever obtained from this abstination of theirs, and it is not obtained because the thought has ceased even to enter the heads of these unfortunate contemporary monks, that although it is indeed possible, by means of these substances exohari formed in them, to perfect themselves, yet this can proceed exclusively only if the second and third being foods are intentionally absorbed and consciously digested in one's presence. And this is possible exclusively only if all the parts of one's presence have been accustomed beforehand consciously to fulfill both sacred being part dog duties, that is, to fulfill conscious labours and intentional sufferings. It is, however, unjust to say that no sensible result at all is obtained among these monks there. There are even obtained among them sensible results of 2 independent kinds, so that you may understand why these mentioned 2 independent kinds of results are obtained among contemporary abstaining monks. I must repeat to you once again that, according to the fundamental cosmic sacred law of Heptaparapashinok, if everything in general existing in our megalocosmos, the great as well as the small, does not receive in the process of evolution at the time of its passing through both Madonna inns of the sacred Heptaparapashinok, corresponding foreign help coming from outside, then it begins to evolve back to those definite states from which it began its evolution. The same, of course, proceeds with the definite cosmic substances which are formed in the presences of these same terrestrial abstaining monks. And so, my boy, in consequence of the fact that these terrestrial monks, particularly the contemporary, do not intentionally aid the further evolution of these substances inevitably formed in them from the constant use of the first being food, that is, do not actualize any being part dog duty at all in their common presences, either intentionally or even automatically, and at the same time they do not remove these substances from themselves in the normal way foredesigned by nature, then these substances begin to evolve in them themselves, and during this evolution of being exiohari or sperm there is worked out, among the many transient definite substances which are in general formed in their common presences by such an evolutionary process, a definite transient substance which has the property of having two kinds of action on the general functioning of the planetary body of a being. The first kind of action of this definite substance consists in this, that it promotes the depositing of superfluous, what is called karastag, or as they call it there, fat. And its second kind of action promotes the arising and the dispersing over the whole planetary body of what are called poison ionoscrean vibrations. The consequence of all this is that in the first case, these terrestrial abstaining monks become extraordinarily, as it is usually said there, fat, and sometimes one indeed meets among these fat monks specimens with such an abundant deposit of fat that they could give many points to that form of being there which they expressly fatten in order to increase this same fat in their planetary bodies, and this form of being they call their pig. And in the second case, on the contrary, these abstaining monks become, as it is also usually said there, meagre thin, and the action of the poison ionoscrean vibrations which penetrate through them is chiefly evident in their general psyche, which becomes sharply dual, and the manifestations of which are divided into two diametrically opposite kinds: the outer, visible and for show, sensed by everyone around them, and the inner and hidden, which the ordinary beings there, especially the contemporary, are entirely incapable of ascertaining or perceiving, namely in the outer visible manifestations. These poison ionoscrean monks appear to be what your favourites would express as bigots of a high degree, and in their hidden inner manifestations, not shown to others, what your favourites would call expert cynics, also of a high degree. As regards the causes why poison ionoscrean vibrations are obtained among certain of the abstaining monks from the evolutionary process of the exiohari instead of the deposit of fat, there even exists one very detailed theory there about this, worked out by certain, as they are called, Catholic monks, who several centuries ago proved in great detail that this proceeds because in the first year of their existence these same thin monks very zealously occupied themselves with that occupation from which pimples, known even to medicine then, genuinely appear on the faces of young beings there. For a full representation and understanding concerning the significance of this kind of abstinence among contemporary monks there, it remains for me to add that of which I became convinced during my last sojourn there among them, and namely that already, thanks only to these consequences flowing from the evolutionary process of the exiohari, the fixation of various consequences of the properties of the organ kundabuffer in the common presences of these unfortunate terrestrial abstaining monks has become greatly facilitated and has in consequence increased. At this point in his narrative, Beelzebub was interrupted by a ship's servant who gave him a litio chonabris, which he put to his ear and began to listen to its contents.